Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another predictions video. And in today's video I'm going to be predicting the Pacheco versus Nelson fight. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. So going into this fight, Pacheco is 22-0 with 18 KOs and Nelson is 20-0 with 16 KOs. This fight is for the WBC USA and the WBO International Super Middleweight titles. Pacheco's last fight was a win via KO in round 6 versus Sulecki, and Nelson's last fight was a win via KO in round 5 versus Rodriguez. Pacheco is 23 and Nelson is 36. Pacheco is 6'4" with a 79-inch reach, and Nelson is 5'10" with a 75-inch reach. And to speak a bit more about what I've just been saying, Pacheco, this is him making a return to headlining events, and I suppose this is typically, on paper, a step up for him. He's not been, I suppose, moved too quickly by Matchroom, and I feel like a matchup with Nelson perhaps could be a way in which Matchroom are taking it perhaps a little bit safe with a fight, one of their fighters, one of their top level fighters, because obviously times haven't been the best for matchroom fighters as of recent. They've not all had the highest levels of success, like I mentioned, as of recent. And so they're going to be keen to save their fighters, protect their fighters when they can. And they perhaps might be doing that here with this matchup versus Nelson. But at the same time, Nelson most definitely is going to be a tough fighter to beat. He's gonna perhaps come in wearing his jorts. It was an interesting thing in general to see that he was rocking his jorts for his fight, his last fight. It was something in which, to be honest, was maybe a bit unseen. At least in the highest professional rankings as of recent times, especially. I can't really think of anybody who's been rocking around in jorts, most of the time in public, but also in in general, just in the boxing ring. It's just something that's a bit different. Perhaps it helped create a bit more of a hype around him, and he's fought on some excellent cards. He's been at Crawford, been and seemingly gotten on well with Crawford. I believe he's done some sparring with Crawford as well, and so he's a good name. He's been around and trained with some excellent names, some excellent fighters, and so he's definitely is going to be a tough test for Pacheco. Pacheco, like I mentioned, is headlining yet another event out in America. This is the second of Matchroom's two shows in which they have in one night. Perhaps Matchroom is really trying to show that they are still a very high global level promotion. When you look at Queensbury as of recent, they have announced that they want to do global shows, and they've brought in a lot of good global fighters. They've brought in a lot of good young global fighters as well, and with the signing of them to the zone, I feel like there definitely is going to be some tough times ahead for Matchroom to really kind of show that they are still the level in which they are. But I think by putting on two high level shows at the same time, on the same night, they are still showing off to an extent that they can do that. Not many promotions, if any at all, are really doing that, and so you do have to give them credit for, of course, doing it. And Pacheco, he is an excellent fighter, and he is a great talent. And for what he has achieved, I'm going to speak more about his age in just a moment, but what he has achieved for how old he is just spectacular, to be completely honest. I mean, obviously, he has been keeping these two belts for quite a while now and just defending them over and over again. It's interesting to see that, you see quite often young fighters, they want to go through, progress through the belts. They want to put it in, I suppose, football terms, gain as much silverware as possible. But Pacheco perhaps isn't really too fussed about that. Maybe the opportunities haven't been available to do so. He hasn't really seemingly been particularly vocal in calling out anybody, and so he's just kind of been taking names in which have been put in front of him. And to an extent, like I mentioned, he is very young, 23 years of age to be exact, and it's quite incredible. I mean, the fact that he started his professional career in what I believe was 2018 when he was 17 or 18 years of age, first of all, that's an excellent thing to do in itself. And the fact that he's been able to develop the way that he has, sign a big promotional deal, headline multiple different events, and also, gain a fan base whilst doing so, you've got to think that Matchroom aren't just going to put you on a headline show if you aren't deserving it, if you aren't bringing in the money, if you aren't bringing in the fans, the eyeballs to really warrant that. And so he's definitely been doing that. And, like I mentioned, he has just been defending the same belts, but there definitely isn't that rush there, that need there for him to be, chasing all the belts at the moment. And it is a time in which American boxing, they need to build up a superstar, I think, in my opinion. And, there definitely is ones available coming up through, but I just think personally there hasn't been too many of the highest level American events as of recent. I mean, we came seemingly from quite a bit of a high with the likes of Garcia versus Haney, the likes of even, looking back a bit further, Javante Davis versus Garcia, and then you also, of course, had Spence Jr. versus Spence Jr. versus Crawford as well. Just some massive American events there where you see the global level, you see the level in which we typically have expected from American events in the past. You compare that to the likes of, Floyd Mayweather's and Mike Tyson's, some of the events in which they put on America at Madison Square Garden, just blockbuster events, huge nights in boxing. And I feel like, there has been a few, and there is typically still events out in America quite consistently, but I just feel like that kind of the highest level ones perhaps have dropped off a little bit. And, you look at them, obviously Haney, Garcia are going to fight on the same card, Garcia being against Rolly Romero and Haney being versus Ramirez. That will be a big show in itself, not a maybe spectacularly huge show. And then you can also perhaps say, Gervonta Davis as well, kind of leading the way. He had that fight versus Frank Martin again, a great fight and a great performance from himself, but just not that of a huge show. And then, you say the Lamont Roach fight, that isn't really a huge show either. You have, of course, Morel vs Benavides coming up. I think that's a great fight and probably will be a great show as well. But I just feel like in general they are kind of really in need to keep the American big events coming. But it seems like there is a plan with, the winner of the Haney and Garcia fights they have separately. They'll go on to fight each other, and then the winner of that will go on to fight the winner of Lopez versus Ennis, which will probably be in America as well. And, I'm not too sure, and I don't know who, if they have announced where Crawford versus Canelo, if that does happen, will actually be. And so there definitely is perhaps going to be huge events coming into America, but there just has been maybe a little bit of a dip as of recent. And somebody like Pacheco, definitely with what's going on with Canelo. Canelo, he's taking a bit of a step back from the division. The last time he did that, it was when he fought Bivol, and the division was still in an excellent position, and there still was great fights there to be made. There are still some high level fights there to be made, but they're just not quite on the level in which perhaps there once was. When you look at, like I mentioned, Canelo taking a bit of a step away, even if he probably loses against, or no, not saying he probably will lose, but if he does lose versus Crawford, then they'll probably just make a rematch anyway. So that's going to probably take up quite a lot of his time. And to be honest, I don't necessarily know how long he's left in his career, and if he is to lose them fights versus Crawford, then he might retire. So, like I mentioned, this could be perhaps Canelo taking a step back, but Canelo, it might be the end of his super middleweight reign. We'll have to wait and see what happens, of course, with the very tough matchups versus Crawford. But then you look at some other names in which have recently kind of left the super middleweight division. Saunders is one of them. He had an excellent fight versus Canelo and was a huge UK name to be in and amongst the division. Golovkin was a massive name, a mammoth name, a name in which, technically he hasn't left the division, but he hasn't fought in a long time. And to be honest, I believe he's 40 years of age now or pushing that. I don't think anybody is too eager to see him back in it again. Everybody would, I believe, probably just accept it if he was to just retire. I don't really think I've really seen him at much events as of recent on social media or anything. So I feel like he's definitely taking a step away, and I don't necessarily know if there is anything or much left for him to fight for. Munguia, of course, he was, to be honest, still riding quite a bit of a high after the Canelo loss, but he's gone on from then, had a couple good wins and looked excellent in them performances, but then bang, all of a sudden he had that shock loss versus Race, and Race perhaps could build himself up to be a bit of a French fan favourite and could be a big name to have in the division, but for the moment he's not that, and unless he's gonna be knocking out people, fight in, fight out, he's probably not gonna become that or that of the level of that of Munguia. And so Munguia, he's not down and out. He can definitely rebuild and come back. It was a shock flush moment. I believe he was winning the fights before that, and so he definitely can come back. But just for the moments, that was quite a devastating fight to perhaps be out of the world kind of title level contention just for the minute. And then this fighter hasn't, he is champion in the division, but Skull, he fought hard with the IBF to get the fights in which he stripped Canelo to have. He then fought Shishkin, and perhaps people were thinking, this is a big world title fight. We might see a bit of a different Skull. We might see a Skull in which is that bit more entertaining, might be really wanted to put on that show and really kind of prove a point, but he didn't really look like that, to be honest. He just is a defensive minded fighter. He's not a bad fighter, but he's definitely a more defensive minded fighter, and so he's not going to bring that entertainment. And so, of course, the belt is there to fight for, and Pacheco might be wanting to chase that, and he might be first in line at the moment, but it's not going to bring the same kind of level of eyes or entertainment as previous matchups possibly could have. And then you also look at Benavidez and Morel as well. Perhaps they will never come back down to the super middleweight division again. They'll probably ask a lot of fighters to come up and fight them if they are willing to. I think it's a great matchup. Benavidez perhaps was forced out of the division by Canelo because he was just waiting so long and he wanted to see what other opportunities were available for him. But then, Morel perhaps was chasing the Benavidez fight, perhaps was just too big for the division and has now secured himself this excellent fight as well. But then some names there you could add in Andrade as well when he was really kind of coming up as a good top fighter. There has been some excellent top fighters, but the super middleweight division is lacking that a bit at the moment. We have still the likes of Balanga. He's a great name to have, but he's just not really kind of linked to fight anybody too big. Mbili is kind of the similar kind of position, not really linked to fight anybody too big. He was kind of next in line to fight Canelo, but like I say, Canelo is probably going to be tied up with Crawford for a bit, and then he might even go on to fight the winner of Bivol vs Beterbiev or Morel vs Benavidez, or if them two matchups fight against each other, he might fight the winner of that. And so he definitely probably isn't going to be in too much of a rush to come back down, and it makes sense in his point in his career and what he's achieved. He's had a few recent fights against, the top mandatory challengers, but he doesn't really have anything left to prove, so he just wants the biggest money fights. And so that, again, like I say, is fair enough. So, there's fighters again, like I mentioned, Belanga and Bealey, so Race, Skull is still about, and Caleb Plant, also there's Iglesias. There is some still good fights there to be made, but yeah, it's just perhaps lacking a little bit and maybe isn't in need of a clear standout or just for the best to fight the best in the division. It seems like Riyadh season, possibly after this fight versus Nelson, will get involved with Pacheco and we'll see what he's about and we'll look at ventures available for him. And so, that's good to see. But of course, you can't write out Nelson as a fighter. Perhaps he has been that bit of a background type fighter in his career. Like I mentioned, he's fought on Crawford undercards and he's had wins on them, and he's also been a top ranked fighter, I believe, in the past as well, and had success there as well. And he's always, brought that something a bit different with his entertainment aspect. He's had a big win versus Kilic, which was for the NABO title, where he was against Buddy McGirt's fighter in Kilic, and that was a big victory for him. But like I mentioned, I feel like he perhaps might be that bit more of a threat because he is that bit of a, I suppose, background type fighter, because you just don't really know what to expect. And so he definitely could cause Pacheco problems with overlooking, I suppose, and being overconfident. And I think Pacheco, as a young fighter, he has been susceptible in the past to overlook his opponents and be too confident going into a fight. And perhaps you don't want to be doing that versus somebody like a Nelson. And you would have to maybe say if Nelson was that bit younger, he definitely could have had more success in his career. Perhaps it is a bit of a shame that he is on the older side of things in his career, and he's, I believe, been around since 2016. So even when he started professionally, he was still in mid to latter side of his 20s, and still was older than Pacheco is now. He's never kind of had that luxury about him with, I suppose, youthfulness at the highest of levels. And so yeah, perhaps he definitely could have, with the backing that he has and the exposure in which he's had, gotten to a position where he was in line for a title at this point, or was gonna be champion at this point. He didn't really need to have had this padded record, but you would probably have to say because of his age, maybe it has been smart to really try and maybe pad the record, pick the matchups a little bit more, and try and get himself a world ranking without really testing himself against the top level guys. And so now he's here and he has this big fight, and I feel like this is definitely the opportunity which is made for him. But it's on a good card as well. There's some excellent fights on it. I'll speak about the co-main in just a moment and give my prediction for it. But Mercado versus Pedraza I think is a good fight. Pedraza is coming off that loss versus Keyshawn Davis, and we have just recently seen Keyshawn Davis be announced to fight Barinchik. So if Mercado is able to beat Pedraza and beat him in impressive fashion, he could be one or two more fights off a world title fight. And Mercado versus Keyshawn Davis, if he beats Barinchik, I think could be an excellent fight down the line. And so I definitely think he has a bright career, Mercado, and he has to get through Pedraza. Pedraza is a notable name. That's what you want to see on the records of fighters coming up, notable names in which have fought at the world level in the past. He's definitely not at that level anymore, realistically. He's taken some bad defeats and he's not on the best of runs at the moment, but Mercado really has a chance to make a statement there. And also, we see Rubalcava and debutant for Matchroom as well on the show. There is some good fights on the card and some good fighters on the card. And like I mentioned, I was going to speak about this co-main event in Cruz versus Salcido. I think it is an excellent matchup, to be completely honest. I mean, I think people are a little bit surprised. I mean, I personally am a bit surprised to see that this matchup has been made, and in general, Salcido is going to be a tough matchup for Cruz. Salcido himself is definitely not somebody in which you can overlook or underestimate. He's really coming off a high versus Chris Colbert, which, Chris Colbert hasn't always looked amazing in his career, and that was kind of the latter side of his career, I suppose, and I don't really know how much he has left to give, and he definitely did look smaller in that fight, and Salcido really utilised his size with him, and if he can do that against a Cruz who has that lesser professional experience, he might be able to have success. Cruz isn't a young fighter, he's still got that level of experience, but it's just not professional experience. And Salcido, it doesn't make his work look messy. Mexican fighters can sometimes make their work look messy when they're as pressuring and as come forwards as that of Salcido is, but he might be able to cause him problems. And I think Cruz has definitely been progressed fast. There's no real surprise he's been progressed fast because of the amateur pedigree, of course, and the amount of promotions in which wanted to sign him when he was turning professional. But he definitely has moved quickly, and to be honest, I'm quite a bit of a fan of that. When you have achieved as much as you can or as much as you have in the amateurs, like he has, and really has the name at this point, it's great to see him not, just getting put against matchups in which are a bit lesser and just talking about the fact that you beat these guys in the amateurs. Really build yourself up, and if he wins this fight, he could be in the line for maybe a world title eliminator or something crazy like that, to be completely honest, because Salcido is an excellent fighter, and obviously, like I mentioned, he is coming off a very good win and a good high as well. Cruz, I think, has been excellent and has amazing skills and has that capability about him to, at times, just look untouchable, unhurtable, and just excellent. And there's very few prospects that can look that good as what he does, and that's credit to him. And I'm sure that's what everybody has seen in the past from his amateur fights as well. And perhaps I don't necessarily know if his chin's been tested too much. I think he's been hurt in his fights. That Moran fight, he seemingly did get hurt as well, and so I just don't necessarily know if his chin's been tested enough. And he does get quarter shots from time to time, and it does seem to have an effect. So Salcido might be able to do that, and I think Salcido, like I said, is a big step up, and it's going to be interesting, definitely, to see how Cruz is able to handle that. Of course, like I mentioned, that this fight is for the IBF International Lightweight title. I might not have said that, but now I have. I think that Cruz will win via unanimous decision. I think it's going to be a tougher fight than perhaps Cruz might anticipate. I think Salcido definitely could come into it into the later rounds and have success. Cruz is definitely going to have to be on his back foot A game and not getting any kind of sloppy punches, leaving them through, which he did in that last fight versus Moran. And I just don't necessarily know if he's going to be able to get him out of there. And I think Cruz is going to win. Like I say, still though via unanimous decision, but it's definitely going to be, in my opinion, a bit more of a closer matchup than perhaps people are anticipating, and perhaps what the most part of Cruz's professional career has been so far. Going back to the main event, though, of course, Pacheco as a fighter, he has that long-rangey jab. He utilises it so well, and to be honest, it makes me happy to see. When you see fighters that are so rangy with their reach and are so tall, some of them just don't utilise their long rangey jab as much as what they should do, and Pacheco definitely does that and sets up off it very well and picks his shots very well off of it because of how good it is. He's often relaxed as well, which is nice to see. It means when he is in his flow state, it looks comfortable and it looks really nice on the eye. Typically, he's quite consistent with his work, and for the most part, it's, like I say, quite fluid if he gets in his rhythm, and he's going to be pumping out that jab, and he's going to follow off it, and he's going to also be able to fight on the front foot or the back foot at the same time. I believe that he does circle out well, which is nice to see. He's got good timing and is able to land and punish shots with timing, but he's also able to circle out well as well. So it means he could catch Nelson coming in with a nice time shot, or he could circle off the ropes. I think Nelson does his best work when you are set up against the ropes, but I just don't know if Pacheco is going to allow that opportunity to come to fruition. He sees you coming in throughout the lot of time, and typically, even if he just kind of leaves his jab out there, you don't want to always leave the jab out there, but when it is as long as that of Pacheco's, even if he does leave it out there, it's very difficult for a fighter to be able to kind of explode around it, and he can see you coming from that aspect and kind of stop you from your momentum with that. Like I say, he follows off his jab very well, and typically is just out of range very successfully, and has alternating power in his shots, and I do believe he improves throughout the fight, and that's definitely an impressive kind of skill to have. In that last fight versus Solecki, he really kind of spoke what he was going to do. He said that he was going to start out slow. He said he was going to build into it. Then he said he was going to be able to hurt him into the mid to later rounds, and he did that excellently. And in general, it was just very impressive to see that you kind of did spell it out for us. And yeah, just like I say, alternated his power and kept his stamina and kept his work rate throughout all of it. He changes levels very well. When he does, he changes it very well. I feel like he did not do it quite as much as what I'm sure a lot of people would have wanted against Solecki, but in the end, he got the knockout through the body shot, and it was quite ironic seeing the commentators say that he needs to go to the body, and then he did it, and then he knocked him out. But yeah, I'd like to see him perhaps go to the body a bit more against somebody like Nelson. If he gets you on the ropes, I think he's definitely going to be able to try and kind of go in with a bit of an onslaught of punches. Perhaps that's not his best. I don't think he does his best work in close, and he can have problems when he is fighting in close, but he will let his hands go if he gets you on the ropes. I think he's got the much better timing than that of Nelson. I think he's accurate, and most, realistically, the more accurate out of the two as well. Negatives about him, I think his hands are definitely low, and I think that's something in which definitely does cause problems for him. Like I say, I think he still hasn't mastered being in close, and I think he will kind of stand a bit straight on as well. I think his short shots aren't excellent. He can admire his work. He can throw from low as well. He can definitely get caught with big counters, and that's where Nelson, who always aims to throw big counters, they're not always going to land, but he always does aim. If he can catch one, he might be able to hurt Pacheco, even if that's just off guard, because of Pacheco keeping his hands low. He is a bit of a slower starter. Like I mentioned, he's kind of said it himself. He often wants to kind of get that feeling for the fight before he kind of goes into it. So he is a bit of a slow starter. When he throws in combinations, like I say, he is quite open. And when he gets that confidence going, he is more and more open with his defense. He does stand quite tall, and in that aspect, he is a big target. He's definitely the less physical out of the two. So Nelson, if he is able to make it to pass Pacheco's guard, even if that isn't the later rounds, or even if he comes on fast early, he might be able to rough him up a little bit. His head movement isn't excellent, Pacheco, and he does seemingly make the same mistakes quite often. Like I say, coming in a bit and getting caught with the same kind of overhands over and over again. He did quite a bit versus Selecki in their fight, and if you can get past the jab, then I feel like there's definitely going to be openings for shots to land on him, and like I say, in general, he does admire his work at the same time. To speak about Nelson as a fighter, he throws counters. Are they always going to land? Not necessarily. Sometimes they can be very far away, and Pacheco, if he utilises his range, he could definitely make Nelson look quite silly, to be completely honest. But he'll always try and throw counters and always try and respond, and you've got to give him that credit. He's got good short shots. I think he's got better short shots than that of Pacheco. He goes to the body strong, and if he is able to land his counters, they often will be to the body, and they will be nice to see. He's got an imposing jab himself. He is, like I say, physically strong. It's gonna hurt. He has that power, and he has that aggression with him. He's typically, like I say, an in-close type fighter, so if he can rough up Pacheco to an extent and just continually, if he can try and push him back, or, just like I say, find a way past that jab, then he could definitely have success. He lets his hands go when he has you on the ropes, and I'm just not sure what opportunities he's going to get to see Pacheco on the ropes. Perhaps if he draws him into a fight, then maybe, but we will have to wait and see. He's got solid shot variety. It's not too bad. I think his uppercut, which to be fair he did utilise to knock out Rodriguez, really isn't the best of shots in the technique in which he utilises to throw it. But he has got still, like I say, a relatively good shot variety. He's got a high guard. He's tough. He can take a good, tough, strong shot. If you give him time, that's where he's going to work his best. So Pacheco will probably give you time in them opening rounds, and that's where Nelson's going to be able to work and see what he can do. He is typically a bit of a combination thrower, perhaps a bit more so than that of Pacheco. He's, like I say, aggressive. I don't think he forces the fight, though, even though he does carry the power and even though he is aggressive. He had Rodriguez hurt, but he didn't seem to force the fight too much, which was nice to see. He and also offers constant pressure. It's not like that pressure in which is that Mexican style, always throwing pressure, but it is a constant, walking you down type pressure. Negatives about him, I think he's definitely not as fast as that of Pacheco. I think his timing, like I say, can be often off, and he can be made to look quite silly as a result of that, and he can struggle to find range for his counters, much so, and Pacheco, like I say, could definitely utilise that. He can be wasteful with his shots at times, he can be flat-footed. I don't think he turns into his shots that nicely. Like I say, his uppercut seemingly is quite awkward. He looks quite awkward throwing it and uncomfortable even throwing it. His defensive movements really isn't that anything much so at all. I don't think he's willing to go on the back foot anywhere near so as much as that Pacheco. His accuracy isn't as good. He's quite a big target as well himself. He uh, doesn't really deal with a fast jab that well, and he does back up in straight lines as well. He can definitely be made to miss, like I mentioned, and his reactions are nowhere near the kind of level of that of Pacheco, perhaps showing his age there to an extent. I'm not too sure if that's his age or his fighting style. Pacheco is the favourite for this fight, and I think that Pacheco will win via TKO in round 8. Like I mentioned, I think Nelson might try come on strong early. I think Pacheco, if he stays comfortable, he stays relaxed, he continually circles off the ropes and doesn't sit on the ropes, and doesn't try and time Nelson too much too early, then he could possibly tire Nelson out and even just frustrate Nelson because of how long the jab is of that Pacheco, and make, like I say, Nelson look silly at times because he can't land the counters in which he would want to. And then he could go into the later rounds, improve throughout the fight, like I mentioned that he does do, and then win via TKO in round 8. Then who he could go on to fight next, like I mentioned, I feel like the division is very open at the moment, perhaps in one of the worst positions it has been for a while, but for somebody like a Pacheco, it might be the best positions, just in his opinion, because it gives him more opportunities. So you could go on to fight someone like an Mbili, that could be an excellent fight to happen. Balanga, again, an excellent fight to happen. Two matchroom fighters, I feel like that does need to happen at some point soon. Serace could happen. Obviously, Serace seemingly isn't signed to anybody, so that could possibly happen. Like I say, School, if he wants to go in for that title fight, School is still not really signed to any major promotion. He's with Aegon Sports, and so I'm sure they're willing to work with Matchroom, so that could happen. Munguia possibly could happen as well if he wants to go straight into a tough contest, Munguia. But yeah, there is, like I mentioned, it's in a rough position to an extent to the division, but it's not in an awful position. There definitely are still fights available, but it will just be interesting to see what path Pacheco goes down. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did, like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.